able to do this, and I'll try to stop it.
We're now live.
All right, let's do it.
Well, welcome to the show. I'm Dale, of course. Leslie, my co-host, is here. And I can't pronounce your last name, Mark, so I'm not going to butcher it for you. Would you just give us a brief introduction of yourself and your history?
Absolutely. Yeah. So my name is Mark Azulay. I founded a company called Men's Therapy Online based out of Colorado. And I'm a psychotherapist. I've been a therapist for about 10 years. Got trained at Naropa University, which is a Buddhist university. So I had a kind of a spiritual background originally. I'm also in recovery from drugs and alcohol. So happy to talk about that as well. And yeah, basically the company is focused around helping guys work on their issues and improve their emotional and mental states. You know, typical stuff we work on is anger management, substance use, divorce, porn addiction, things like that are kind of typical things that bring guys in for therapy and treatment.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question. Does a guy, because I always feel sorry for men, because women, at least, it's acceptable to, I don't want to say complain, but talk about the emotional turmoils we have. But for men, it seems like they don't, how can I say this? What's the right word? You can help me here. It's not manly.
It's not manly. Yeah. It's not accepted. I mean, I think it's getting better. I think COVID actually, in some ways it was a real silver lining. I think mental health got to the forefront because people were kind of losing their minds during that. But yeah, I mean, a lot of men, we don't want to look weak, right? We don't want to look vulnerable. We don't want to be bullied or taken advantage of or scammed, so like showing any kind of mental and emotional weakness can often be taken advantage of, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of guys talk about stuff, really.
Let me ask you a question.
Go ahead, Dale.
What part of Colorado are you in?
What
part of Colorado?
Yeah, I'm in Evergreen. So I lived in Boulder for 10 years and moved up to Evergreen 2 years ago. Yeah.
You're condoling.
I'm in Lakewood.
Okay.
Yeah, and what I was going to say is I worked with pregnant women for like 30 years as a registered nurse. And, they would complain about boyfriends, husbands, whatever, not talking. But then when we talked to them, they're like, well, he was crying. I'm like, well, you want him to be vulnerable. Like, you can't have it both ways.
Yeah.
And I love women, but I mean, I didn't mean it that way. I like men, but women are great. However, we do kind of do that double standard, and it really puts guys in a hard place. I remember there was someone once, this guy I was dating, and he was talking, he cried, and I thought it was kind of sexy. I don't know. Like, for someone to to be that authentic and transparent.
Yeah, I mean, that shows that you've done your own trauma work, right? Because I think we talk about that is the norm. The first thing, right, is like women, spouses, partners, whatever, right? They want their men to be emotional. The guy opens up and it puts the ick on him, right? To use kind of like the common vernacular, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think a lot of women feel afraid when they see their man being upset or angry or scared, because there is that kind of traditional gender role of the man being the protector and the leader and the strong, the rock, right, of the family.
Yeah.
And even though women want that, oftentimes they push that away. And I think it confuses a lot of men because we're trying.
I understand why. I mean, it's, look, I'm super authentic and transparent, and I gotta be honest with you, I have a very hard time with women who are like in the working force and I don't think have done their work. So someone who's authentic, right, serves as a mirror for themselves. And, so anyone who's
look in the mirror when it reflects back on their flaws or their idiosyncrasies or whatever, when you put a mirror up to somebody that reflects them as you see them, it really upsets them. I had that. I'm a former therapist myself, a counselor. I was a counselor in Denver for 24 years.
Nice.
What seems to? Oh, I'm sorry, Dale. I'm sorry. I thought you were done.
That's what I see is that mirror effect is not always effective because it gets them agitated.
Totally, yeah. And if people haven't done the work themselves, right? If they haven't gone to those places of deep grief or those places of fear, and somebody
Mhm.
shows that mirror, they're like, oh God, like I don't want to feel that. Like,
Yeah.
get that away from me.
Right.
But
And
you know, I didn't think it was going to get this serious. You know, like I think people get
yeah.
that kind of, jerk reaction.
We know it's funny though, and that's why I said I worked with women low income, so they were open to, they knew they were struggling,
Yeah.
so they were inspired and transformed from having someone else be authentic. Whereas the people who are closed off, I'm coming out there and I create safe spaces to all these working women going, I'm not creating safe spaces for them. I'm like agitating people, and it was really nothing. When men come to you, though, I mean, they're not at that point. They're at the point where they're willing to take a look inward, obviously.
Yes
Because,
and no. So typically, a lot of men come to therapy after a incident, right?
mm,
So I think women are a little more proactive as far as seeking mental health treatment because, like you said, it's way more normal just to kind of talk about, your life and your relationships and your struggle and your
yeah,
hopes and dreams. Whereas a lot of men, unfortunately, it takes something big. So for me personally, it was a drug overdose. Right, that brings a lot of
yeah,
guys in. It's like a rock bottom recovery experience. For a lot of guys, it's a divorce or losing their job, or having an anger outburst where, God forbid, they maybe strike their partner or something, or strike a
yeah,
child. So for a lot of guys, it has to get pretty bad before they get to therapy because I mean, and I get it, right? Like as guys, like we would much rather like do the new gym routine, right, or get the new diet, or maybe buy a new car, right? Like
yeah.
we'll do anything before talking about our feelings because it's really foreign to us and it can be really intimidating, especially in the beginning. So
Do
they're
you,
I
let me
know
rock
for
ask
me,
you,
I'm a recovered,
bottom. Oh yeah, go ahead.
yeah, yeah, I'm a recovered addict, alcoholic myself. And for me, I'd lost my life, my job,
Yeah.
my wife, my kids, my car, a house. That was it. I woke up 3 days later in detox after a 2-year drunk. Woke up in
wow,
detox saying, that's it, I'm done.
Yeah. And
I'll
then
give you guys,
yeah.
Mark,
But I just
how long,
It takes
how
that
long,
rock bottom experience. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah.
how long were you drinking before you
So
hit
mine,
rock bottom?
mine was more drug use. I was opiates and marijuana were kind of my two. Drinking
Yeah,
was there, but it wasn't a primary addiction. But yeah, it was about 4 years, kind of from end of high school through college, where I went
yeah,
really, really hard. And like I said,
yeah,
culminated in overdose, culminated in a lot of like lost friends. I was selling, I was drug dealing for a while. So I just
yeah.
went like really, really hard, really fast. But I've been sober and recovered for about 10 years now. So
Why do you,
Congratulations.
for you personally, I'm sorry, Dale, why do you think you started
oh, I got a whole story for
with the
that. So
drug?
yeah, I mean, I'll do the cliff notes. You can dive in if there's stuff that's interested to you. But I grew up pretty much bullied. I was like an overweight, nerdy kid in rural Maryland, so I got bullied into the
Mm,
ground growing up. Didn't really fit in with that culture. And my parents were wonderful, lovely, very safe, and provided a lot of security, but weren't very emotionally attuned. They're both immigrants, so a lot of their focus was
mhm,
just on like creating safety and creating the American beachhead, which is awesome. And they like really succeeded at that. And I will never fault them for that. And they didn't have that emotional level because they were focused on survival. So
yeah,
I didn't really have a lot of support. So essentially I went to college, right? And I wanted to recreate myself. And I started lying. I started creating a guy who, a 16, 17-year-old kid thinks is cool, which for me is like a punk rock drug guy that like talks to girls and like drives fast cars. Like it's like midlife crisis, but you're 18, right?
yeah,
Um, and I was just lying. I mean, I got to be honest. Like I was just like pretending to be this person who I wasn't, and I fell
yeah,
into toxic masculinity is a very hot button topic, and we can dive into that. But some toxic masculinity ideas of like never say no, never back down, never show fear. So I would never say
mm,
no to anything. When someone's like, "Hey, you want to try this drug? You want to try cocaine?" I'm like, "Yeah, done it tons of times." Like
oh,
with
geez,
women, I would just keep pushing and going forward. Like I would never show any weakness to the point where I just
yeah,
really got in deep. I really just got buried
mm,
by all these web of lies.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
eventually it took an overdose to wake up and be like, oh my God, like I'm not this person. Like this thing that I've constructed is like very fragile and might kill
yeah.
me. if I don't change it.
Yeah,
So I
well,
never really was that person, but again, I wanted to be cool. I wanted to fit in, honestly.
Yeah. Is that Dale? You shook your head when he said he was bullied. Is that your
yeah,
story too?
I was too, up until 2 years ago. I've been bullied all my life, and that's that's not how I got into my drug addiction. More alcohol than drugs, but I did do a few drugs here and there. I spent 8 months on heroin and gave it up. Went through heavens to hell.
That's huge. I give you guys such credit. I can't stick to anything. I mean, it takes my son was a recovering alcoholic, my ex-husband was, and I give them credit. They just kind of quit cold turkey. And I'm like, wow, it's impressive.
That's a hard way to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really is. Yeah. Because I gave up 12-step program at about 5 years sober. I started mental health therapy. I've been doing it for 30 years since.
Yeah. Well, I remember with my son, he was, and I think I knew, but a lot of stuff was going on. I didn't think I wanted to admit that he was an alcoholic. You know what I mean? Like I just couldn't deal with one more thing. But so he came to me and he's like, look, I need to quit drinking. So I'm going to rehab Monday. And I'm like, huh? What? But we're driving to rehab and he has a bottle of vodka he's drinking. And I'm going, seriously? He goes, no, the guy said I should do this. And I'm like, what guy told you? But he, said like, just get it out, have your last. And I'm, I just thought this seems so weird driving him to rehab, but he stayed sober. So
as long as he stayed sober, but I do not agree with that, taking the drinks before you go to treatment.
Me neither.
I don't think Mark does either.
No way.
Yeah.
I've never heard that. Never heard that.
He said a therapist, but he was quite good at lying and manipulating, and I was quite good at believing it. I didn't. It's funny because when you have someone who's drinking, right? Like I knew well enough to go, like, this is not my son. I kind of knew something was up. This is the addiction that's behaving that way. But it's really hard when it's your kid.
Yeah,
because it's your kid. You don't want to think they steal from you, and But Mark, you had said something before. Over the last 5 or 6 years, I realized the way I stayed resilient as a kid without support and with all the things that you would think would throw somebody into some serious trauma consequences. But it was emotional intimacy with strangers, like emotionally intimate conversations all throughout the day that kept me resilient. And I often thought that's like the key to marriages that dissolve in affairs, that, it starts with a lack of emotional intimacy in a relationship. Do you feel that's an accurate statement from your base experience?
Yeah, I think it's true. I mean, I think the way I would flip that is just looking at the other side of the coin, which is loneliness. I think a lot of people are really lonely because they're not having emotional intimacy or anything, spiritual intimacy, mental, spiritual, right? Like, I think there's a lot of lonely people. And I think, in relationships specifically, a lot of people, the walls just keep coming up, like a hurt happens and it's like, okay, you're never going to go there again, right? The wall is built. I'm never going to talk to you about X, Y, and Z. And if it never gets worked out, those walls just keep compounding on each other to the point where you have two people living lives in parallel and they're not talking about anything. I think it's really common, especially, post-marriage, post-kids, where it can fall into logistics a lot, right? Like, it's just about how do you get the kids from point A to point B, or do you sign them up for soccer, or what's their grades? And you miss the person, you miss the human that's in front of you. So I think that does certainly atrophy relationships. It's a big problem here.
So do you recommend, though, for men who come in for, let's say, marital issues or that lack of, do you recommend their partner come in also?
Yeah, so we do that. We mostly refer out to couples counselors because we focus mainly on individual and men's groups. But a lot of what we do in our men's group specifically is we have guys come in with a raw emotion, which is scary, right? And I think the fact that we're all men, all of our therapists are men, it creates a level of safety where a guy can be really crude, honestly, and really angry and like vent it out. And we're not going to take it seriously in a way. Like we're not going to be like, oh, you're a
Right.
misogynist, or oh, you
Yeah.
hate your wife. Like we get it. Like we also have this rage in us, and we need to just like get it out. And then we help the guy kind of package it into something that's more effective to bring to his partner or to bring to a couples counselor. So I
Yeah.
think men really need spaces where we can be that kind of raw animal primal thing that we have in us in a safe place. So then again, we can like, translate it and bring it back into
Yeah.
society so it can be effective. But that first punch is really critical for a lot of guys. And we don't have
Yeah.
to where we can do that because like you were saying earlier, I think it intimidates a lot of people. I think it disgusts a lot of people. I think it makes a lot of people afraid. And a guy never
Yeah.
gets to express how he might really feel, even though, like I said, it might be kind of crude and brutal right out the gate.
Yeah,
Just
Yeah.
it can be.
It can be, yeah.
And I
Yeah.
used to do a women's group
Okay.
about 6 weeks, and that was brutal on me
Yeah.
You ran a women's group?
for about 6 weeks. But the counselor that they had, what the therapist they had, was out with pneumonia for 6 weeks, and somebody had to do the group, and I got fit.
So what were the women? Because we can be a tough, right? It can be tough.
Social services, most of them are from social services in danger of losing their kids. Child Protective Services.
Oh, so you're and
SALS and it was an intense 6 weeks. But I learned an awful lot.
Yeah.
I like running groups. I ran a group once for at a meth clinic, and it was awesome. It was really good. I liked it, But those women I could see, and I've done a few in prisons, and yeah, they're interesting. One of the things I was saying, I got really good at a young age because I didn't have sport to learning how to hold a safe space for my own dark, which I see now as I can hold anyone's dark space as long as I know there's a dark space. Personally, I don't do well with people who are hiding because I don't know what I'm dealing with.
Yeah.
I can deal with anything, as long as I know what I'm dealing with. And I think that's
a question for you. I'm doing a program for my church on addiction, because something I know a little bit about. And I did some research on the current research has been done on addiction, and I could find darn little of it. Most research I've seen done on any drug or any problem with addiction has been marijuana. The rest of them seem to be stuck in the 60s and 70s, 80s. I mean, it was amazing to me that this stuff I was teaching in the 90s. Why are they still teaching this stuff? Why don't they come up with new somethings? No research being done.
Yeah, I think research has gone down, or research has mostly moved to pharmaceuticals, right? There's a lot of people interested in learning about like methadone and antabuse and Suboxone and like figuring out if there's, correlations there. I would encourage you to look at there's an author called Gabor Mate who's doing some more stuff, and essentially his there's so much there, but his main kind of thesis is that the opposite of addiction is connection. So he kind of makes the same loneliness argument that I was making on this show. This idea that it's a lot of people that had trauma, right, that was never processed, or deep isolation. And this is true for me. I wasn't able to realize this until I was, did 5 years of therapy, but a lot of my addiction was suicidal. Like there was a part of me that really wanted to die, either physically or just kind of like emotionally, really wanted to numb myself out and do this kind of like slow death. And it's something that like I've had to work on and contend with. You talk about darkness, right? But this idea that like my addiction, maybe on the surface looked like fun, right? But it wasn't fun. Like there was a real dark, like suicidal self-hatred thing. And I think that's the way that addiction research and treatment needs to go, because just treating the surface level isn't enough. Right. There are often a lot of stuff underneath it that people.
Well, and that was my whole thing with just life in general. Like you have to feel safe with yourself before you can feel safe, trust, do anything with anyone else. Right. And I worked in public health, and we're always just slapping Band-Aids. And I don't know if it's that people can't see the benefit of a long-term solution, or it's just too much roll your sleeves up in the streets kind of work. You know what I mean? But the more you slap the Band-Aid on, the deeper and deeper the wound gets.
Yeah. Well, I think the long work is just that it's long and it's slow and it's unclear if it's working until it does, you know?
Yeah.
And like, I mean, obviously this is my whole job. So like, I do strongly believe it works, but I think for like, the industry, right? For the insurance industry or the medical industry, like it's hard to be like, hey, you're going to need to talk to somebody every week for like 4 years. And then maybe you'll feel better. That's a hard sell to get insurance coverage.
But I know.
Well, 12 sessions and you're good, right? Which is like,
are they still doing that brief therapy nonsense?
Yeah, they're doing like 6 sessions and like you're cured. Like, I don't think that's how that works.
Then we get to go to name
and that's see, to me, like, I don't find the BS, and I guess that's because, and I'm not just saying me, but like, I never had support as a kid or whatever. I don't think I ever would kill myself, but like the dark moments got really dark, right? And I would go, like, come on, just bring me home. But I don't think I'd have the courage to kill myself because I know I'd have to come back and I didn't want to do that again. But what I don't understand is that, like, if, like, at the age of 16, I knew I needed a connection and I needed to be seen and accepted for who I was. So I went out in the world and I just went, how do I get this? I'm like, give it. Like, so I just kind of opened my heart and went, fuck it. Oh, sorry. Here I am, like me or not. And I started talking to 15 or so people a day, just saying, hey, my name's Leslie. I struggle with this. How about you? And I would look in their eyes and they would just open up. And it was that brief, intimate connection. I didn't need friendships. I didn't need it was just talking to those people let me know I wasn't alone in the world. And I often wonder, for example, grief counseling, why didn't it's if we could just open up with one another as human beings, you know, well, it's going to take a long time too, but grief is grief. It's painful. And I think that's the thing. We're all looking not to have pain, but we need the pain. It's I don't know. It's kind of a gift. It's just, I don't know. Here are your thoughts. Dale, I don't know if you and I were talking about this one time, but depression. A few years ago, major depression hit and it resurfaced because I didn't have contact with people, right? So everything I had my whole life, but never really caused any problems, came to surface. And I remember thinking, I wonder if depression is like, my body needs this. It's a way, it's supposed to be that way to rid all the stuff that's been trapped within. So my question is, what are your feelings that not a chemical depression, but like just a situational depression or whatever, that it's not something we should try to feel better immediately from versus working through it?
Yeah, there's a couple things. So yes, I mean, chemical depression is real, and there are people that just regulate serotonin and dopamine, and
that's why I said it's totally different thing.
Right. Yeah. That's like there's like a medical issue, right? But then what I think we're talking about is like an emotional, maybe even spiritual depression, and I think there are two kind of themes that I see with the clients that I work on. So I'll just share them quickly, right? So the first one is often depression is repression. It's kind of the phrase that I use. So it's often if, I'll say a guy, because I work with only men, right? But like say a guy is like, doesn't want to feel something, doesn't want to feel anger, doesn't want to feel sadness, doesn't want to feel grief, right? He'll push that away, push that away, push that away. But because the brain is dumb, right? It pushes everything away, right? The brain isn't that specific, not that clever. Yeah. So it starts pushing everything away, everything down, and creates this like really just deep numbness. And then often people with depression are told like, oh, be happier, go to the gym, talk to your friend. But like, that's ignoring the depression instead of like, I think what you're saying is like, is there wisdom here? Is there a message here? Is there something that I'm trying not to feel that I actually need to address in real time? I need to actually work on something, right? Yeah. That's the message of depression. And then the second one is often depression can also feel like, is that Jim Carrey kind of coined this term of saying that depression can be deep rest. So it can be this idea of,
I heard that.
Yeah, you've been like playing a character. For Jim Carrey, it's the Jim Carrey character, right? But for us, it can
Yeah.
be a provider, a role model, our job, our relationship, and the body is just rebelling against that because it's not
Yeah.
who you
And
are.
you don't even have to be playing a role. Like what I've learned a lot from, because I've always been super authentic, although I did kind of hide my intellect for a while, long story, but so I did hide a piece of me from me, didn't, but I think for those who've had trauma and lived in this, the body has lived in a state of chronic toxic stress. Like I emotionally healed without knowing I needed to heal, but I didn't know I had traumatic brain injury and some optic nerve issues. So it doesn't matter what I do. If my eyes are open, my body's in a state of stress because it's not perceiving, you know, things properly. And I see now that depression, my body did need to rest because every day it's like, okay, step there, no step there. Like, oops, put the dish, is it on the counter or did it drop on the. So my body was really stressed, and it was, yeah.
Well, the role you're
So it
playing
was,
is masking, right? I mean, if you have this,
yeah.
TBI and you have optic nerve issues, like you're trying to mask and normal
Well,
symptoms.
I didn't know I had them until 2000.
Yeah,
Yeah, I didn't know I had them. And it was kind of cool because as I was uncovering this, like, my whole life made sense. I'm like, now I know why I was the way I was,
right.
why I made eye contact with people. It's the only way I could process what they're saying. But that was so impactful for like the humanness of people that I ran into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's similar for a lot of individuals that are neurodivergent that have ADHD or ADD
Yeah.
or on the spectrum, is they often get depressed because it takes so much energy output just to exist in normal society or whatever standard
Yeah.
culture, that they are playing a role, right? They're passing, and they're not
Yeah.
being able to be
Well, I
who they
guess you're right. I guess, see, I could never figure out, and that was one of the reasons I started doing what I did, is I was really intelligent, but I had no clue how people did what they did, and I couldn't explain how I always knew the answers. Like, how they make it. And there's a lot of judgment. Like I look at people and if they have neurodiversity or like TBIs or anything like that's cognitive that people can't see, particularly if they're intelligent, a lot of those emotional issues may not be from their own, but from what society has thrown on because they don't look like they're measuring up.
Yeah.
And I was also going to ask you about addiction. When I worked in Philadelphia, there was a point where the addiction rate in kids, just like teenagers, went skyrocketing. And I'm like, did anyone look to tie it into when we took the arts out of school? Because I know like having a neurodiverse brain that's really smart but can't do very simple things, it's frustrating. Nobody understands, and then to take the creative expression away from a neurodiverse person is like just waiting for substance abuse to happen.
Yeah, I'd imagine there's correlation with that. I mean, I think removing art, removing gym, removing music, right? I think really pigeonholing kids. I think a lot of it is, also technology, right? Social media, everyone knows about that, right? And like just all comparison and cyberbullying and just, having a kid's brain have to reconcile, hundreds, if not thousands, if not tens of thousands of relationships all simultaneously when the brain's
Mm-hmm.
only actually able to hold about 400 relationships. And that's like at its max. So you throw
Mm-hmm.
in like this massive thing and the brain like goes crazy with comparison and
Yeah.
judgment and shame. And I think a lack of role models. I think a lot of kids don't have the people to look up to that your generation may have, right? Like we don't have like the Martin Luther Kings or the Gandhis or JFK,
Yeah.
right? Like we don't have these like role models that I think like embody a healthy adulthood, really. And I think
Yeah.
a lot of children, especially men, I think are really lost. A lot of boys are lost. Like we don't know what it means to be a man, and we're getting a lot of negative messages from politicians and from the media that being a man is like bad and oppressive and you're a villain, and a lot of those young boys I work with are really confused and hurt by that because they don't know how to fit into society. They don't want to be the
Yeah.
villain. Nobody wants to be Darth Vader. Like nobody wants to be, wants to grow up and be the villain, right? And like a lot of boys are like, I don't know what to do because I feel like I'm like the antagonist of planet Earth right now, you know?
Yeah, right now I would not want to be a white male because you're pigeonholed into something that I'm like, same thing cops in a way were. And I'm like, listen, we need
We
to
still
stop
are.
just labeling everybody. We just,
Yeah.
I
Being
mean,
a
that's
white
part
male,
media, but
being a white male, we are the only group that's left that can be abused.
Mhm.
yeah,
We can be discriminated against. We can be, and that really brings down on the depression on people. It brings trauma to people. It brings depression. It brings a lot of things to people because we are the target of choice. We're the only ones
yeah.
left.
Yeah,
Well, you know,
Everybody else.
I never,
that's true.
I've just never kind of like, I mean, I think I got really good at understanding. I think I understood other people before I understood me because asking questions and listening to other people was the way I started to learn about myself. Right? Because I'd ask someone about something and they'd tell me an answer and I go, ooh, I kind of do that. And it didn't sound good when they said it. And I went, uh-oh, maybe I better work on that, And but I've never liked to label groups, even if I empathize with them, because by labeling groups, all you do is minimize the traumas of other groups. You know what I mean? Like, and trauma is trauma. It's each person, you know, uh, being bullied once at school emotionally to one person could be emotionally the same as being sexually abused to other to, you know what I mean? Like, who am I to say what your trauma impacted you, like how you feel, unless you tell me, and then I still don't really know for sure. But, yeah.
Yeah,
That's
I
true,
think so.
Leslie. That very true. That we don't know that your trauma is your trauma. What you went through is
Yeah.
what you went through, and you have your emotions and your feelings. The same with me. The same with everybody who has trauma, and that's almost
hmm
the entire world's population.
Yeah.
It's trauma of
Like
some
you were
kind.
saying, with women, like when I would talk to them and just talk to them about relationships, and I'd say, like, don't say you did this, you did this. I'm like, just say I feel, because really, someone may, but you know in your head that your feelings are your feelings.
Right.
Like they're neither wrong or right. They're your feelings. So, in relationships, always instead of going like, well, when you did that or you made me feel, no, just I feel. Because it's just, that is what it is. It's
Nobody can make you feel anything without your permission.
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that's hard too. That statement's true if you're very secure in who you are.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not secure in who you are, and that's the thing, like some of the things I say we set people up to. I used to do talks for codependent groups and AA, and I was like, look, there's one thing I'm going to say. I just want the people who hired me, to know is that I don't buy into that. It's a character flaw, a defect. It's a coping mechanism most people adopted. Not all. But most people I've met, it's a coping mechanism they adopted at some point in their childhood, 0 to 18, to help them stay emotionally safe. It just so happens it didn't work well as it's all, I mean? Like, and it may have been healthy or not healthy. But to call it a character defect, most people judge themselves bad enough. Like, why do we
Mhm.
try to
Well,
get them to judge themselves more?
like you can't recover from, right? Like if it's just like who you are, there's no
Yeah.
chance of changing it or recovery. I want to go back to what you said about gender dynamics because it's against stereotypes, but I think it's true in most cases, which is where women often put their feelings onto others, right? Like
hmm
like I said, you make me feel this, you did this, right? Like, and they get upset when people don't feel the same as them because women are
Yeah.
so much about connection through feelings, right? And a lot of men, especially my generation. I think the boomer generation is a little bit different, but with the millennial generation and Gen Z, we withhold our feelings a lot because we don't want to
Yeah.
hurt the women in our lives. We don't want
Yeah.
to get mad at them. We don't want to be a predator. We don't want to be a creep. Like we
Mhm.
hold a lot back.
Do you
Again, that's why
ever?
my company is like men only because a lot of guys don't feel safe being honest around women because we've
Yeah.
been like censoring constantly for our whole lives.
Yeah. And
Very
I
true.
think one of the issue why women do that is so many women don't look at themselves. And whether it comes from, you know, having to go out and years ago, back when I was, growing up, like women were stereotyped as one thing. And if you did go out and do a masculine, quote unquote, masculine job, I mean, you kind of had to mask. But I think I always say there's a difference between like masking, putting the armor to me is that voice in your head going, don't do that. You can't do that. Come on. Remember what happened last time you did that? No one's going to love you but me. Stay in here with me. Whereas like faking it to me is more the heart saying, come on, you can do this. Go for it. Okay, big deal. If it doesn't work out, I'm here. Like we'll try again. And so I think what happens with women, my age group, and maybe like 40 and older, is that we went out and instead of knowing who we were and faking it, we just blocked our heart, thinking you could just block it out in the world, but you can't block it. And same thing you said before, like compartmentalizing is, I think personally, a bunch of BS. I don't have any research to show, but same way with your brain, like you can't just unlock your heart sometimes. You can't put the help. What's where I'm looking for? The armor. You can't put it on sometimes and take it off others. I think do you agree, disagree, both you guys, as men?
Yeah, Dale, you wanna go ahead?
Well, I really don't see that too well because give me a minute here. My mind just went.
Sure.
At my age, it happens occasionally. It goes blank on you. Men tend to strike back when faced with those types of situations, either verbally or physically.
Okay.
A lot of the violence comes from even the verbal violence, which is still violence.
Right.
It's still just as traumatic.
Yeah.
Or the physical violence, or they go out and commit a crime, not because they're a criminal, but because it's what they need to get rid of that pent up that's been building up. Because I have found that most of the anger that I have seen in my groups were built up over a period of time, not just one incident. It was many incidents, in some cases years before, going back to their childhood, even like you, Leslie. You started opening it and discovering it.
Yeah.
I know for me, I knew it. I tried to kill my father when I was 8. I knew what he was doing was wrong. My sister stopped me, but I tried. And that was that built up over years of abuse that I've been suffering from, and my siblings.
Yeah.
There wasn't just one incident. That was many incidents.
How about your opinion on that, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I think Dale's spot on, right? I think with a lot of guys, it is that resentment, right? Or those long-term things that it does pop a gasket, right? Like I think as men, we're trained to compartmentalize. And in many ways, that's beneficial for us, right? Like I think if you go back to whatever survival caveman analogy, right? Of like when we have to kill the deer or we have to defend our village, we got to put everything in the box. That's important. Right. So we can go and execute the mission, right? However, ancient cultures, to most of them, not all of them, most of them had some way to open up the box later, whether it be through religious practice or through what's called the men's lodge, which is where guys will go and just like vent it out, or through religion or through mentors. We open that box. So what I tell my guys is like, look, compartmentalizing, that's what kind of in some ways makes us men, that we can do that. But you got to go back. You got to go back and you got to open it up in the appropriate place, because
and that was
they were talking about. You get the blow up, you get the violent blow up. That's often physical, sometimes emotional, sometimes sexual. Because it doesn't work. We can do it, but it doesn't work.
Yeah, that was a connection I was trying to make before with when I was talking about the schools and taking creativity out. Right, is that at least like when Dale and I were growing up, like I know guys all the time, and I don't know if it helped them or not, but like there were bands, like physically creative, but using your hands. And now I hear people saying they're really creative on the computer. I'm like, it's not really, I don't think, the same as far as moving energy through the body.
Yeah, I think that's true. So there's the Jungian, archetypes of masculinity, which are king, warrior, magician, and lover, right? And most men tend to relate with one, sometimes two. You could call the awakened or evolved man to kind of you embody four, and you're able to pick them up, right? All that being said, is I think men need to be able to discharge their emotion based on their personality. So some guys are warrior, so they're very physical. So they literally need contact sports or martial arts or CrossFit or something where they can just like push themselves physically.
Yeah.
Some men are lovers, and for them it's sex and intimacy and connection. They need that arena where they can really express themselves through love. Some are a magician. I'm more on the magician side. So like for me, it's art and creativity and poetry and painting, right? Like I need ways to be able to express that, and then the king is more through like leadership and, building projects and working on things and getting people together. It's about relationships. So all I'd say is yes, I think men need those outlets, and our culture is a warrior culture, right? Which is good, but it leaves those other three ways of expression off to the sideline often. Like guys can be in sports, that's okay. But if a guy wants to be a poet, now people are starting to raise their eyebrows a little bit. And I think that's unfortunate because men can express themselves through all different types of ways. And we need those to avoid those outbursts that you were talking about.
Yeah. What's the youngest age kid that you've seen? I know you said you worked with young kids too.
Yeah, usually like coming of age. So about 14, 15 is the youngest that I work on. Children that are like late middle school, early high school, that are looking for male role models and that are looking for starting to have these questions about gender. Because even though it's there when they're younger, of course, because they're born with it, right? They don't really have those questions until they get a little bit older into those teenager years. So we do a lot of coming of age work at our company, which is like, hey, you're a boy. What does it mean to be a man? How do you become the man that you want to be in the world?
So do you ever bring women in to ask? Because I remember I was running a group once and I asked the women, I said, you mind if I bring a guy in who's willing to like shoot a million questions? And you know what I mean? Because does it do any good, whether it's men and women, just to have, okay, men understand men, women understand. But if the issue is between men and women, we should really start talking openly to each other. Like, okay, when I say this, how does it make you feel? And what can I do to, put you less on the defense? So do you ever bring women in to answer the questions and kind of show the other perspective, not being right or wrong, just showing the other perspective?
I have not done that yet, although that is aspirational. I'm really just focused on men's mental health right now.
Yeah.
However, my dream is like maybe, like I want to keep doing what I'm doing for about 10, 15 more years. But the dream is to find, my female counterpart, to find a woman who has done, a women's organization or women's groups, or has really gone into femininity in the same way that I've studied masculinity. Because I'm only one person. So I want to niche instead of trying to do everything. But I think what you're talking about, which is gender reconciliation, is critical, right? And I would love to run retreats with, if I could find a partner, right, my work wife or whatever, right, that we could do.
Well, if you ever need one. Yeah, that's my thing. Because people are like, who do you work with? I'm like, my whole point is that we have to start talking authentically. Because, let's face it, onto a bigger level, humanity's in deep shit. Like, if we we need to start talking about the things that everyone's buried deeply and be comfortable doing it. But the problem is, if you're not comfortable with yourself, it's very hard to talk about something that's uncomfortable. Like, I'm comfortable with me. I know the good, the bad, and the ugly, so I can talk about anything without triggering me. The only thing that might trigger me some minutes is people who are inauthentic and have the armor on, because it doesn't trigger, but I don't know what to do to get through the armor with women. With guys, I can't. With women, I can't. But but yeah. So that's the thing. I'm just for the sake of us, I think we really need to. But how do you? So do you have men that come to you because they're forced to because of the legal system?
No, I used to work in that world. I actually used to do DUI counseling for
Yeah.
about 3 years. That was one of my early careers. So I did
Mhm.
work on that. No, no one's forced. And I think that's critical because that, when
Yeah.
someone's forced, of course, the mask is going to come up because the
Yeah.
defense mechanism comes up because they don't want to go to jail. Like nobody wants to go to jail, right? So um, there was some good work there, but a lot of it was just kind of getting people off paper and helping them
Yeah.
clear their record, right? Whereas, now, I mean, sometimes they are forced by their partner, right? Of saying like, "Hey, if you
Mhm.
don't go to therapy, I'm going to divorce you." That is common. But I'm fortunate enough to work with guys that are for the most part voluntary.
Does that
That's good.
work? Do you think that kind of threat, like
Go
if
to
you don't
therapy,
go to therapy?
or I'll divorce you.
Yeah.
What I've seen most of the time is that if they do therapy authentically, they divorce
Yeah.
their wife. because they often do some healing and they learn about the toxic relationship, right? And they learn
Yeah.
about why it's not a good relationship to be in, regardless of what their wife is saying.
You know what I never understood from a guy or a girl, but I've heard it. Well, I've worked with women, that's why, but I've heard more from women. It's like there's people who kind of want to force their spouse to stay or their partner. Because I'm like, why do you want someone to stay when they don't want to be there? Like,
Yeah,
have you figured that one out yet? Or is it just that fear of
I think it's fear of being alone,
being alone?
right?
Yeah.
Fear of being alone. I think a lot of people are afraid of rejection, and like if their partner leaves, and it means that they're unlovable, right? Whatever that trauma story they had growing up is finally true. I mean, I,
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are afraid of change, and they would rather have, the devil they know kind of thing, right? Like the
Yeah.
brain wants to keep things consistent, even though it might be painful. The brain doesn't
Yeah.
care. The brain wants consistency. It doesn't want novelty. Again, even the novelty could be healing and could be better. It wants to do the routine over and over again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You were talking about this. My practice for the first 15 years was almost exclusively DUI and drug court here in Denver, which
Yeah.
was an incredible drug court back at the beginning. And I consider myself to be a very successful counselor because I was running at about 50% or better, 5 years still sober, post work,
Wow.
That's really good. Yeah.
which is a pretty good number.
Yeah, really good.
But you can get through to them in forced therapy.
You
Not
can or
everybody.
you can't? You
You
can.
can. I got through a
Can't.
lot of.
You can.
One time, sometimes I just looked them in the eye and just says, "You're just a damn drunk, street drunk."
Yeah.
And they look back at me like, "Huh? You can't talk to me that way. I've got all this business and stuff." You're a junkie. Know it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I mean,
sometimes
my goal when I was working in that setting was to just let them know at the end that like therapy is a thing and that it's a resource, and be like, hey, there's deeper work here. Like you can do it or not. A big part of my practice then and still now is respecting my client and being like, look, man, like I'll open the door, but you got to walk through it. Like I'm not going to do it for you, but I will show you the path to go. So for a lot of those guys, I was like, hey, here's what I'm seeing. Here's what I think. Here's where you can go. Like, do you want to get better? Do you want to do it? Or do you want to end up here again in another 2 years? And that kind of tough love that I think, Dale, you're talking about is actually really helpful for men and for addicts, especially because we need something that punches through all of our, delusion,
the Leslie was talking about is what's up in place, and it's very stoic. And some of them you need a gentleman, but most of them you just had to be just outright. And I've had some women that way too, who were very in the armor, very tough.
Yeah.
Street girls. Because I had several street girls who were in groups with me too, and I've had all kinds of predators and stuff in my groups, but mostly it was DUI and drug court, and the drug court was easier than the DUI.
Yeah.
Believe it or not.
Yeah.
Well, is that because it was just more obvious of a problem?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the consequences were a bit heavier because I worked very closely with their probation officers, and I could recommend. I call the probation says, this guy needs a vacation. He needs about 4 days out, or 45 days, or whatever, and it stuck. They got whatever I recommended. Probation officers slammed them in.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of authorities. They tended to listen a little better.
So Mark, then, like with the people you see, particularly go back to like when you did work with kids, is it just more role models or like did you see a quote unquote not easy but simple solution on a mass level that you thought, why has no one done this? Am I making sense? I'm certainly not saying it clearly, but you know what I'm saying? Did you see just from your practice, is there a solution for the masses that you would see to help people get in touch with themselves more, particularly young boys?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a great book called Of Boys and Men that talks about this
Okay.
very issue if you really want to dig into it. And I won't remember all of his solutions, but some of them are pretty radical, but I think very helpful. So one that he talks about, which is probably the most radical, is starting all boys a year late in school. So we actually
Mm,
giving them another year of kindergarten to get time to mature,
yeah,
to get time to be more physical, to get time to, learn social cues and social dynamics, because the research shows that we develop a little bit slower on those
yeah,
things.
yeah,
And kids that have that, called redshirting. A lot of parents hold back their kids so that they excel in sports. Those men tend
yeah.
to do significantly better than boys that are just in the
Really?
regular system.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Huh, that's
So that
news.
one is really big. Another one that I would love to institute if I was, emperor of America or whatever, would be like a gap year, especially for men. I think like countries that have mandatory military service, or if you look
yeah,
at Australia, that has like a walkabout culture where young boys and young women too take a year off and just travel the country. It's more
yeah,
accepted. I think that's really, really helpful because it lets them do some of that more emotional, mental, spiritual development. It gives them a break from school, lets them really like find themselves.
yeah,
I think that's critical. I think finding ways to make teaching jobs more attractive for men and women, but attracting more male teachers and more male
yeah,
caregivers and more male therapists and more male nurses, and putting men in nurturing roles, because a lot of
Mhm.
young boys are raised by women. And again, women are great, and we need that, but we also need male role models, and
yeah,
a lot of young boys, if you have, like you said, if you have a woman teacher who hasn't done her own work around her own misandry, which is the female version of misogyny, that's just
yeah.
bleeding onto the kids constantly,
Well,
right?
and that's what I think happens in health and a lot of mental health. I mean,
Yes.
most of us go into the field because we want to give other people what we didn't get,
Mhm.
which
Mhm.
makes us sometimes great at what we do. But if we don't understand our why as to why we're going in and we don't look at ourselves, then I, at least I saw in nursing with in public health where a lot of the patients had significant traumas is that like there's no way to be genuinely empathetic and compassionate if you're hiding from your own trauma
Mhm.
or pain, whatever you want to call it,
But I
you
want to
know.
ask you, Mark, you mentioned a couple of times without really going into it. Do you think, because I know 12-step programs push it quite seriously, but do you personally think that some type of spirituality or religious, is that helpful?
I think it's helpful. I mean, for me, the God piece wasn't so connecting, but for me, like I studied Buddhism, so my higher power was the present moment, right? Like I just wanted to be
Mm,
present. I want to be connected. I didn't know where my answers were, but I knew they were there. Like I knew if
Mhm.
I could just like get out of my own head and into the moment, into reality, my answers would be there. And my spirituality has since developed. I do a lot of nature-based practice and kind of more
mm,
Right, yeah. Right.
but I do think connecting something higher and learning humility
yeah,
and learning a relationship with love, whether you call that God or source or light or love or whatever,
Yeah.
I think that's critical, because a lot of addicts, we don't have that within ourselves. We have a lot of pain and darkness and shadow. And I
yeah,
think being able to bring in that compassion, that Christ consciousness, whether it's Jesus Christ or not, right? I think is really helpful for most addicts. So
yeah. I think, may I also say that in 2017, like I'd always listen to my intuition. I never knew why, but following that inner voice in my heart always led me to good things. Like I thrived in the world when I shouldn't have, and wasn't even trying to, if that makes sense, just because I was like living in the moment and focused on being and giving other people I needed. And then, but when I left work to share this message, and all this stuff was uncovered, and uncovered trauma, like the brain injury, 3 near-death experiences. I mean, like there was a lot of stuff to unpack. I couldn't find a therapist because I knew, first of all, I was call myself a mental health nurse too, because they all had anxiety, depression. But if they look at what I did following my own tuition and what I've done the last 7 years, I knew they would like just go, okay, put her away. Like, so it's so cool that you are a spiritual therapist,
Yes.
psychotherapist, because you understand that, I mean, I've had therapists in the past tell me, because I've got ADD, like, you know, instead of spending my own conferences for personal development, why don't I just spend it and go back to school for another career so I can be guaranteed a job? I'm like, what? Where are you guaranteed a job for going to college? Like, so thank you for bringing this spiritual base into therapy.
Yeah, we got about 5 minutes here, Mark, and I want to know if there's anything.
So where can people, oh, sorry, Dale, go ahead.
No, that's what I was going to ask, is where can we get a hold of you?
Yeah.
What's your website?
Yeah, if you want to find me, it's at menstherapy.online. So men's therapy, one word, .online. Everything is there. We're on all our social media platforms. We have a podcast called the Men's Therapy Podcast. You can Google that. Check that on Spotify. It's been running for 3 years. We interview guys talking about men's mental health and all kinds of things like that. So menstherapy.online, everything on there. If you want to book a session or you just want to watch us on YouTube, we got everything there. So check that out.
Well,
can I ask one last quickie?
Go ahead. Make it quick. Go ahead.
Real quick. The men that you see who have children, are they concerned about their behaviors carrying on to the next generation?
The ones
are they able to?
Yeah, the ones that don't are. And motherhood, if you talk about meaning, for a lot of guys that have done some shred of work and have gotten over the kind of like selfishness that all young people have, fatherhood is a big one, right? And they want to break the chain to not pass it on to their children. And they want to be a better parent than the parents that they had. So I think that's maybe the best reason, if not certainly top 3. I think it's a really good reason for this work is to be a better parent.
I agree.
Thank you so much for this conversation.
Yeah, it's great.
Thank you. You've been a marvelous guest. We really appreciate it. I'm about out of space. I may be able to get you up there this week, but more likely to be next week once I get room for you on my bandwidth, my host. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah,
thank you, Mark.
Launched, and I'll share it on all my platforms as well. So happy to.
Yeah, I will do that. Come on. Anyway.
Okay.
I'm going to end the live. You don't have to leave. I got to end the stream, though.